Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so very, very happy that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Himalaya, Ghana, wherever you find your podcasts. And please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Spread the word to everybody you know and love. Join us right now from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Our guest is here today to celebrate his brand new children's book. It's called The Magnificent Mischief of Tad Lincoln. Please welcome back to the show, Raymond Arroyo. Hey, Raymond, how are you?
I am so great. Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure being with you.
Delighted to have you back on. This seems like a really, really fun book. What inspired you to write about Abraham Lincoln's youngest son?
Well, I didn't know a lot about Tad Lincoln, like most of your listeners and viewers. I knew Lincoln. I had read biographies, and his name had passed my eye, but he didn't register. It was not a personality I held on to. But as a reporter for years, I've covered an annual event at the White House. It happens. It's a holiday national tradition. No spoilers here, so I'm going to withhold what it is. But there is a national tradition at the White House, and it's a holiday tradition. And as I dug into its origins, I realized Tad Lincoln and his father Abraham Lincoln created this tradition. They were the first ones to do it, and I see it now as a monument to their relationship, to their affection, and to the mercy and forgiveness they taught one another. It's a really fascinating story, and it works on a bunch of levels, because Tad Lincoln was a boy. He's a 9-year-old boy. He goes into the White House. He's knocking things over and alarming the staff, and, the contemporaries of Lincoln called him a hellion and thought he was completely out of control. So there is an element of that in the book, and I've read it to so many classrooms now. Kids love that part of the story. But on a deeper level, it really is about the bond between Abraham Lincoln and Tad Lincoln, a father and son, which I thought an important part of not only our nation's history, but this holiday tradition. And it's a neat way of opening up Thanksgiving as a holiday, as well as a bit of history and a historic figure to younger audiences.
Yeah, that relationship between father and son is so very important. I think a lot of us think about how important it is for the son, that relationship with your dad, that strong figure, hopefully, and dependable figure. But as a dad who has raised a couple of kids who are now pretty amazing adults, I think the reverse is true also. I know I look back and, boy, my kids both had a huge influence in helping me grow to be the person I am right now.
Well, this is part of the Turnabout Tales series that I've been writing for HarperCollins. And a turnabout tale is a challenge faced, a decision made, and history turns. And that's what happens in all of these books. My last book was about Thomas Edison. You had me on. And Edison's mother really saved him. He was thrown out of school at 8 years old. She rescues him from that, homeschools him, and really nurtures the man who would become the world's greatest inventor. In this story, Tad Lincoln, The Magnificent Mischief of Tad Lincoln, you have a son who saves his father. Because the way I see it, and the historic record substantiates this, Tad Lincoln was really the anchor, the touch of normalcy in Abe Lincoln's life when he was surrounded by chaos and loss and death. So though his cabinet secretaries, even his personal secretaries say, what is Abe Lincoln doing? Why is he indulging this child? He's letting this kid run rampant. The kid's out of control. To Abraham Lincoln, Tad Lincoln was a moment of joy, a moment of fun, a reminder of the normalcy on the other side of the hell he was living in.
Yeah.
And that's what this story is about, that father and son bond, and how you learn, you teach your children, and then your children teach you. And together they created Thanksgiving. I mean, the same year that the incidents in our story take place, Abraham Lincoln creates Thanksgiving as a national holiday by proclamation. All of that, I think, is bound up in his family experience, what's happening there. And so it's an interesting view on history and a perspective on history that kids are not afforded. Mm-hmm. They know Lincoln as this remote figure, kind of serious figure. Here you see him as a dad, and they can put themselves in the place of Tad Lincoln, which I've seen that as I've read it to kids across the country.
I think that's so important, because I think if our kids and if we as adults can see Lincoln as a human being and seeing the challenges that he struggled with, making the decisions that he made that changed history, I think it can give us hope for ourselves that maybe we can also do some pretty magnificent
Jed,
things.
I once interviewed Mother Teresa, and she said, children are a reminder that God hasn't abandoned us. And I thought of that as I was writing some of this book. And one of the things that kept occurring, and again, I had to dig deep because there's not a lot on Tad Lincoln, or even the relationship between Tad and Abraham Lincoln. There are very few books. It's a portion of biographies, but it's certainly not the focus of many. And there's one out of print book on Tad Lincoln. So, one of the things that kept coming back is people would describe Abraham Lincoln's kids playing pranks on him, and Tad would, grab his hat and run away. And Lincoln would be bent over. This is the description of contemporaries. He would be bent at the waist in neighing laughter. And I thought, I wanted people to see that Abraham Lincoln. So there he is. And I made sure our illustrator sort of gave people that. So you see a joyous Lincoln here too. Yes, he's serious at times, but you see the father who is lightened by being near his children and having that exchange. And I think it's also a good reminder to parents that kids don't have to be perfection. They just have to be kids. And many times that's why they're in our lives and we're in their lives, to shape them, to guide them, but also to have them shape and guide us.
Yeah. I love that. I think nowadays, if Tad Lincoln was running around the White House right now, somebody might slap a ADHD label on him and try to give him some medications and not appreciate the humor that he's bringing into the situation.
Yeah. Well, and he had, Tad Lincoln had a cleft palate. Mm-hmm. It was subtle, but it was a cleft palate, which made his speech difficult for people to understand. And he had some learning disabilities. He didn't read very well, which drew him closer to the family. He was very at home in his family and near adults. And that becomes really his world. So it is interesting, and you're right. This is a child that would have probably been on medication or, sent away if he were around today. The Lincolns took a different perspective. And yes, they did indulge him, and he did crazy things. I mean, he hitched a goat to the dining room chair in the East Room of the White House. He's galloping around. We capture that in the book. And kids love the kind of slapstick fun that he had. And I thought it was important to include that. And then you get into this story of, the closeness of the bond between father and son. But I love the idea that there is a national tradition continued to this day that really does capture the essence of that relationship between Tad and Abraham Lincoln, which was principally about mercy and forgiveness. It's a theme throughout the end of Lincoln's presidency as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I was reading is that Lincoln had so much mercy and forgiveness that he pardoned, I think it was 82% of the pardons that came by his desk.
Yeah.
How much of that do you think was Tad kind of, giving him?
Well, it was both and. Here's what I think. I think Lincoln clearly had some kind of religious conversion that was going on in the latter years of the White House. I mean, you hear talk of God, and for a long time he went to no church. He really wasn't religious at all. And then you see it a kind of dawning and more God speak in the speeches as it goes on. But when you look at the record, the staff never liked to allow people into the the White House to meet with Lincoln, because if they asked for a pardon, he would probably grant it. And there were lines outside the White House, I discovered, where people would wait to try to see President Lincoln. And late into the night, he would bring them up. They would stand in front of his desk. They'd make their argument, and he would write a pardon for them. And Tad was literally at the floor of the desk, sitting next to the desk, listening to all of this, taking it all in, watching. So I think Abraham Lincoln taught his son about the power of mercy and forgiveness, and he obviously saw the reaction of the people whose child he was pardoning. And later, when Tad Lincoln needs it, he goes to his father for a pardon, and reminds him in the middle of a crisis point in a cabinet meeting, the importance of that lesson. So I do think we teach our children. Marshall McLuhan had that great line: "We shape our tools, and later our tools shape us." Mm-hmm. I think children are the same.
Yeah,
we shape our children, and later they shape us. And this is a wonderful reminder of that, and a joyous family story. Really, one also, Lincoln created Thanksgiving as a season of forgiveness to help heal the wounds and the fractures of the nation. If at any moment we need to be reminded of that, it's today. And I think in the backdrop, in my mind, this is also a powerful underscoring of the importance of Thanksgiving and family and forgiveness, not only in that family, but in your community and to your fellow man.
Absolutely. You know, it's these days, Thanksgiving is a time to remember all the problems, all the mistakes, all the sins that have been committed. And those are important to remember. And it's important to try to do better as a nation. But if we can take one day out of the year to be thankful, hopefully more than one day out of the year to be thankful for all the gifts that we've been blessed with, and the fact that we're a nation that is trying, that we recognize that we're not perfect, that we have ways to go.
Well, and I hope when people, I know from talking to children, when they see, and you know, we went back and forth about whether we should put a turkey on the cover of the book, but this is kind of the central story of the book. Mm-hmm. But I hope every time people, after reading this, when they see that turkey at Thanksgiving, who is sort of the ubiquitous symbol and sign of Thanksgiving, I hope they come away with a different understanding of it, and it informs and broadens their Thanksgiving. I think it will. The kids I've read this to have been fascinated. Yeah. And it brings back not only history, the origins of this holiday, but it gives meaning to the symbol we take for granted. And I love when you can do that in a book.
Yes. And it would be good for me to see turkeys as not the vicious creatures that they are here in Massachusetts.
You must live near turkeys. You know that.
We live near lots of turkeys. They're
See, most of us only encounter them in those butterball bags. Yeah, so they're very tame then.
They attack us on the streets here in Boston.
I know.
Tad, what happened to Tad after his time in the White House?
Well, Tad, I mean, Orson Welles used to say, the difference between a happy ending and a tragic one is when you bring the curtain down. So we bring the curtain down pretty early here. This ends on a happy note with Tad and his father together after, they create this national memorial, this national tradition. What happens later is, of course, sadly, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. Tad Lincoln dies young. He dies at like 18. Oh. It was, he and his mother move off, and it was never the same after that. But again, it's important, I think, to not forget the contribution of these important people, even though they passed through the White House for a limited amount of time. You have a first son here who left a mark and an impact that, frankly, I can't think of any other first child, a daughter or a son of a president, leaving a national mark and a tradition still practiced today. I don't think you can find another. So I thought this is a story worth telling, and it shines new light on not only Lincoln, but the lost figure of Tad Lincoln. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He was a fun kid. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a lot of fun. Very creative, fun boy.
Sounds like it. I think it would be, he would have been great to have in my audience at one of my magic shows. So I would have loved that.
He probably would have destroyed everything, but he'd be a good time.
Yeah, that keeps it different for me. Hey,
That's right.
Real quick, you mentioned that you interviewed Mother Teresa. You know, I was excited one day that I got to perform on a stage that she had been speaking at a month prior to me arriving, and I was amazed. What was it like meeting this giant?
Yeah. Well, you know, she was very tiny to begin with, which, you know, I think stature doesn't always capture, like Tad Lincoln, stature doesn't always capture the importance or magnitude of a figure. Mother Teresa, when she spoke to you, everyone else vanished in the room. It was just you and her. She had that kind of laser focus. She was completely devoted to people. And she had a tender heart. And I'll never forget when she came into the house where I was interviewing her. They had just come from the airport. And they were all the nuns came in. They had their bags. Mother Teresa had a box with a piece of string around it. That was her baggage. It was fascinating to see. But devoted, a woman of prayer, obviously, and devoted to God first. That's why she was serving people. You know, she used to say, "I'm serving God in the distressing disguise of the poor." You know, that's how she saw her mission. And to prove that, when you were in those houses and she was bathing, you know, a sponge bathing of a poor person, or, you know, or tending to the needs of somebody, getting them ready for bed, when that bell rang for prayer, she would clap her hands, and she and all the nuns would rush into the chapel, and they'd fall on their knees and pray and do their allotted time in prayer. Then they'd go back to the people. It was an overflow of that prayer life. It was an outpouring of her spiritual life, the work that we saw. So the world only saw a little sliver of Mother Teresa. I'm privileged and honored that I got to see sort of the backstory, the engine that drove all of that work. And it was a privilege to see.
That's
and humbling.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, I know folks are going to want to find out more about the magnificent Mischief of Tad Lincoln and find out more about the Turnabout Tale series. So can they go, Raymond?
They can go everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, RaymondArroyo.com is my website. There's some breakdowns there, some previews. But really, go out. I think it's important. Why I write these picture books, I call them family reads. Because my real intention, originally this Lincoln book was going to be a chapter book, like the Edison book before it. I decided to turn them into picture books because I wanted to broaden the audience. I wanted more eyes on the story. And what I've discovered is young, old, middle-aged, aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents, they will read with a young person, or the family reads the story together, and everybody can enter it on some level. So they're harder to write, but to me they're more edifying because you're reaching a wider audience. I hope everybody, particularly as we move into the holiday season, they read this together with their families, get it for beloved kids in your life. I think it'll make a big difference, particularly to parents that I think are doing too much today. We're juggling 3 jobs, and we're trying to do something on the side, and then you're trying to, get the kids ready for the practice and the tests, and it's overwhelming, and you forget the thing that matters most is that relationship to each other. And Tad Lincoln and Abraham Lincoln teach that lesson. And it sheds new light on this national holiday and a national tradition at the White House that you can watch with the family this Thanksgiving season. I think all of that together just makes it a rich experience for a family.
Absolutely. And I hope it inspires at least one kid to tie the dog up to the kitchen, to one of the dining room chairs and chase around the house.
Go sleighing through the mom and dad's parties in the dining room. Maybe. I'm not sure that'll go down as well as it did in the Lincoln household.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of The Magnificent Mischief of Tad Lincoln. Our guest has been Raymond Arroyo. Raymond, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jed. Always a pleasure. Thank you. Have a great one.
Before we invite our guests into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, @readingwithyourkids on Instagram and TikTok, and Jedley Magic on Twitter. We would also love for you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. We have an fantastic online magazine. It is called Reading with Your Kids. You're going to find some fantastic writing in the magazine, great author profiles, cooking with your kids, recipes, STEM activities you can do with your kids, find out what games you can play with your kids. So much there on the Reading with Your Kids online magazine, and it is free, and it is available at our website, readingwithyourkids.com. My friends, I'm so excited. We have a wonderful, wonderful guest today. He is the author of his debut picture book. It's called Mr. Thoughtful Gets Into Trouble. Please welcome to the show from the great state of New Hampshire, Christopher Arsenault. Hey, Christopher, how are you?
Hello, fellow thinkers. I'm doing well today, Jed. How are you?
I'm really wonderful. Thank you for including me in the fellow thinkers greeting. I try to think. My beautiful wife will say that there's lots of times I don't always think before I speak, but I guess that's a job hazard.
Well, that's a great thing you have me on the show today.
Indeed.
That's exactly what Mr. Thoughtful does. Is the hope is fellow thinkers allows everybody to kind of relax, right? There's no normal tags. I remove all that. I say, hello, fellow thinkers. I already know that you're stopping to think. I already know that you're stopping to talk because I greeted you like that. And everybody's a fellow thinker if you just take a second to stop before you act and then think. And your Mr. Thoughtful can always be helped, and he will always help you in that return.
Well, we've had one of our favorite guests is Dr. Ron Melmed, and he works with kids with different who are neurally diverse and also have different learning challenges. He especially works with lots of kids who have extra energy, or as some people like to say, ADHD. I like the extra energy. But he has a method that he likes to teach kids. It's called Stop, Take Time to Think. So it's S4T. I think that's how he says it. But
there's another one called Halt. I think a lot of people are familiar with. We do have a high energy house. We have very varying children with situations. ADHD on one end, social kind of unawareness in one. So it's like in my house, Mr. Thoughtful is a combination of working through all these and helping my family guide. So.
And so, the thoughtful question for me would be, did these challenges that you're surrounded with in your home, did they inspire this book?
Absolutely. 110%. It is, well, obviously, yeah, because, just a lot of bouncing, and it makes it hard to narrow your thoughts, to calm them down. And sometimes when we stop to teach children, we're really teaching ourselves a lesson. And that's what this book really does for me, is it's teaching myself these things I want to teach my children, and then I get to entertain them on a page so they can grab a little bit more from it. Because now it's not just dad saying anything. Now it's not just somebody within your community saying something. It's a little cute character named Mr. Thoughtful who will help you tremendously. So the book took a year to really work out. It started out as multiple projects. He was going to be a YouTube channel. I had all these ideas. And so I had to narrow him down. I had to really get inside my own head, and I had to say, what can I do? What can I do now? Is this message really important to get to people now? Or was it important for me to release it? It is. Because when I did release it, or it actually releases today, but I've given some author copies away. Mm-hmm. And the community response was, wow, I got to sit down with my child and discuss what happens when he gets bored or she gets bored, and what do they do next? How do they control those thoughts, so to speak? Well, pause all thoughts, please. And that's what the narrator brings into the story. He shows you that you can be firm with your thoughts, and that is okay. You show yourself tough love every single day. Why not take a little bit control of that method? Yeah. So this book is just an introduction. Mm-hmm. It's just a tool I'm hoping that you can kind of learn with. I'm not asking you to grab it today or tomorrow, but my plans in the future for this is to At the end of the book, I introduce you to what I call thought dragons. Those are very personal characters of mine. They explore things in the next upcoming books that are choose your own adventure. I'm putting entertainment in the hand of the child to navigate something a little bit more difficult. So stay tuned for that.
Did you always dream of writing kids' books?
No, not at all, actually.
Yeah.
I actually went to school for game design. And when I did that, I actually rediscovered my love for art, and I started doodling this little crazy character who just kept creating stories in my head. And so I had to let him out.
Awesome. Well, we're really excited about that. And, you know, here on the podcast, we celebrate families reading together with their kids. We're also celebrating the fact that we can game with our kids, and that gaming with our kids can be very, a whole lot of fun and a great way for families to come together and bond. I wish it was something I appreciated a little bit more when I was a dad to a younger kid. Well, we should, before we stop, we should let people know where they can go to find out more about Mr. Thoughtful Gets Into Trouble, and also find out a little bit more about you.
Well, which one you want first?
Either one. Surprise us.
All right. Well, Mr. Thoughtful released today. Amazon, it's out today. You can follow Mr. Thoughtful on Facebook through Mr. Thoughtful's page, and you can stay up to date with all of that stuff that I'm going to do. I have readings set up in the future to go into libraries and have little conversations about it.
Well, congratulations. We're really excited for you. Mr. Thoughtful Gets Into Trouble. It is available now, and we've had a great time speaking to the author and publisher, Christopher.
And illustrator. Christopher
Arsenault. Hey, Chris, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you. Have the day you'll have.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and will join us for the next exciting episode. If you want to make sure you don't miss a second of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitch Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. And also be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com and download your copy of the Reading With Your Kids online magazine. It's free. It's available at readingwithyourkids.com. Just click on our blog. Before we go, I want to make sure that I give a big thank you to my team: Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dairies, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary. I want to give a big thank you to my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, and most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.